Assalamu alaikum students, how are you? I hope you're all fine. Good. Let's start our today's lecture. Which one is this? Lecture number 24. And I'm sure you know what are we talking about these days. Yes, we are talking about assessment in language teaching. Right? So in the last lecture we started talking of assessment. What is assessment itself? And what is the purpose of assessment, right? And the method of assessment. So these points, in fact, we talked about in the last lecture. Today, we are here to complete that, of course, the part that is assessment part in language teaching. That was part 1, lecture 23. Today, in lecture 24, we have to complete this assessment topic, right? And we call it part 2. So as usual, what do? We review our previous lecture. So in the last lecture, that was lecture number 23, we started talking of assessment, right? And if you remember, we tried to define assessment, and we took views from different teachers, practicing teachers, what and in fact teachers think of assessment, and you remember that different teachers have given different views about assessment. Some said assessment is in fact brings command and control in class. Some teachers are of the view that assessment in fact helps the teachers to improve their teaching, and assessment in fact helps the students, right, to know their weaknesses, and of course they try to put efforts to overcome their problems, right? So in this way, assessment is an important part of your teaching learning process, right? And then we in fact saw some methods of assessment. If you remember, we talked about summative method and we talked about formative method, and we saw that summative method is one that is of course in this method we assess our students at the end of a course, right? So and then formative method, in fact, you see, we assess our students in a proper format. And then we had a criterion. We talk about, in fact, individual reference criteria. We talk about norm reference criteria, in fact. And then we talked about a standard, right? That, of course, what is criteria and what are the different methods, of course, of criteria, and particularly assessment criteria. And then, of course, we decided that the principles and, of course, the other points we will discuss in this lecture. So today we'll be talking more on assessment, and today we might spend more time on this topic because it's a big topic, in fact, and in 2 lectures even it is hard to manage. So today you need to be ready that we'll move fast, in fact, because we have to discuss so many things, right, in the lecture. So we have less time, but we have to do more. So in other words, we have to make the most of it. We have to make the lecture, that is 24. In this lecture we will do more in only these 60 minutes time. So dear students, principles, right? If you remember that we started off assessment and of course the purpose of assessment. You see, this important point is that what are the assessment principles, right? In the first lecture I briefly talked about principles, and today we'll start talking of these principles. So my dear students, generally, if you speak generally, assessment should be based on the following principles. These are of course general principles are there, and again you can think, all right, maybe some more principles would come to your mind. So assessment, authentic use of language is reading, writing, speaking and listening, right? So principle is that it assesses what? Authentic use of language skills, right? Reading skills, writing skills, speaking and listening, all the 4 skills are there. So because we in fact talking of this assessment in this context, because we are language teachers, we will be teaching English as a foreign language. So in our context, in our paradigm, but we say that this, of course, the principle of assessment, one of the principles of assessment is that it assesses all the 4 essential skills of language learning, in fact, and also assesses literacy and language in a variety of contexts. One way is that, of course, you see that you assess the 4 skills, and also, my dear students, another principle is that this assessment assesses what? Literacy and language in a variety of contexts. You know, in language teaching, I hope you know it very well. We had a detailed discussion on this context in the last semester as well, and also in this semester. And by now, I think you are, of course, familiar with this word context and the content. And we talked a lot that the context in language teaching is very important, right? So whenever we make activities, we design activities, so we try to make our activities, context based. So context based activities, in fact, help our students learn language well. These context based activities, of course, prepare students well for this language learning process. So the context, in fact, is of course second principle. Then again, when you talk about the context, then in context, you know, the environment is there, the instruction and the students, right? If you see, go back to the previous slide. So this, in fact, assessment assesses literacy and language in variety of contexts. Now, which variety of contexts? If you see here, the environment, the instruction, right? Of course, the students. Assessment, the next principle is assesses processes as well as products. Now, this is, of course, there are 2 concepts, the process and what the products, right? Now, what is a process? In fact, what is the process of learning a language, right? Because assessment also, in fact, sees the process, right? The how language is taught, right? That how, in fact, of course, listening skill is taught, how speaking skill is taught, and how students learn. Writing, how students learn reading, how students, in fact, of course, do various activities. So, what is the process of their learning, and of course, the process of their speaking, and then once they do well in the process of the learning of a language, so ultimately their product is better, so they become good speakers. So this is what mean when we assess, you assess the process as well as the products. Now again, see, the assessment, another principle is that analyzes the patterns of errors in language and literacy, in fact, right? Because once you assess, you see what are the common problems. Either they are structural problems, they are semantic problems, they are psychological problems, there are sociolinguistic problem, or they are psycholinguistic problem, they are pragmatic problem, they are phonetic problem, they are phonological problem. Which problems are there, right? Then you analyze those things, that see the patterns of errors in language and literacy. And again, assessment also assesses whether it is an error or it's a mistake, right? I hope you know the difference between an error and mistake, my dear students. Again, I tell you that error is, of course, maybe because of the faulty teaching, right? And the mistake, maybe it could be a slip of pen, slip of tongue, right? A mistake can be undone by the student himself. However, if error is there, of course, and if you give a chance to the students, so again the student would commit the same error. However, as far as mistakes are concerned, if you provide that sentence to the student, so he himself would correct it. For example, if the student write, he does not works hard, right? So then you, of course, you underline that sentence and you ask the student to see it again. And once the student, sees this sentence again, he says that he does not work hard. Now, this is what a mistake, because students once, he sees that sentence, so he himself can correct it. However, if it is the error, you ask the student, yes, there is a sentence, and again he says he does not work hard, or he starts thinking what to write. So here it means that, of course, he does not know the exact grammatical pattern here, which means it's an error. So assessment, another principle is that is based on what normal developmental pattern and behavior in language and literacy, of course, acquisition. Clarify and use standards when assessing reading, writing, and content knowledge. So dear student, these are what are some of the principles of CAT or what? Assessment principles, right? So what? That authentic use of the language is assessed, right? Assess what language and literacy, assess the process as well as product, right? And of course is based on normal developmental patterns and behavior in language and literacy acquisition. Clarifies and use standards when assessing these input and output skills. Some more principles are there. Involve students and parents as well as the personnel such as the ESL or mainstream teachers in the assessment process, like all the stakeholders. We discussed earlier that, of course, when assessment is done, right, of course, that the purpose of assessment is that it helps the administrators, it helps the teachers, help the parents, of course, the students. So once, see, the principle of assessment is that it involves all the stakeholders, that how teaching is being done, how students are absorbing things, how students are participating in the class, and what is the environment in that organizational. Of course, we call it administrative support, right? And then how the parents, of course, what is the role of the parents in this way? So that's why when assessment is done, the principle is that it involves all the stakeholders. Be an ongoing part of every day, and of course assessment is not one day, it goes on. Every day assessment is done. It is, of course, it is ideal if assessors can follow all these principles, but in reality it is very difficult to achieve this. Ideally we can say that when we assess, we need to keep all these principles in mind, right? This is what the real situation, a good situation, but there can be some constraints. So in fact, these are some principles of what assessment that we have just talked about. Moving on to the next important point, that is testing in assessment, right? So because earlier I told you that, of course, in the last lecture we discussed testing, evaluation, and the third thing was assessment. So here, the testing, if you test the students, right? So what is testing and evaluation? The role of testing in the classroom, and mind you, our context is language classroom, right? So what is the role of testing in language class? Classroom testing is the topic of course. Well, students, so this, in fact, as far as testing in assessment, of course, is concerned, the role of testing in the classroom is very important, right? And particularly in our language classes. Although the teacher is primarily concerned with teaching rather than testing, because the teacher's job is to teach, right? And that's why, of course, generally, in fact, while he teaches this students, in fact, while the teacher helps his learner to improve that particular skills, if either the teacher is a listening skill teacher, or he is a writing skill teacher, or the teacher is EA teacher, error analysis teacher. So primarily he is there to help his learners improve that language, right? His focus is, in fact, generally he focuses on the improvement of the learners. And that's why, of course, you might have heard, you might have read, of course, that in some institutions where they say that, well, there is no need of a summative assessment at the end, right? These institutions feel that we need to know the progress of the student. We need to see the classroom assessment is important, right? If the teacher feels that the learners are doing well in the class, so it means it's their success. However, if the teacher feels that the class is not taking part in the activities, class is not active, class is not responding, fine, so it is a message that, of course, language is not learned, right, or language is not being taught as it should have been taught, right? So this is again, in fact, a message for the teacher, and again message for the students, for the administrators, and for the parents as well, right? So classroom tests play three important roles in the second language program, or of course you can say foreign language. They define course objectives, they stimulate student progress, and they evaluate class achievement. This is what you see, that when you test a class, in fact, the classroom evaluation, right? So these are the 3 points that you must keep in mind, that the classroom tests play 3 important roles in this foreign language teaching. They define course objectives, that why we have designed the course on listening skills, right? Because once you are in the class and you see and the course objectives are in front of you, and then you start evaluating the students, and then you evaluate them well, because you know that I am a teacher of listening skill, I am teaching writing skills. So what I have to achieve, what are the objectives of this course particularly, and knowing the objectives, then you see I think, I make plans that how can I execute it. Students, you understand? You see, so the classroom testing, in fact, helps us in what? Defining the course objectives, and they stimulate student progress. Because if I know the objective that I need to help my learners in their writing skills, I need to help my learners in their speaking skills, so accordingly I stimulate student progress, fine, and they evaluate class achievement, fine. So knowing the objectives, helping the students progress, and finally I can evaluate what? Class achievements. This is what, my dear students, is the role of teaching, or particularly the role of testing in the classroom is important. Now if I move on, that how to define course objectives, right? It's very important, my dear student, that whenever you start teaching, right, so you need to define objectives of that course that you are teaching. If you are teaching ESP, you are teaching business English, or you are teaching technical English, or you are teaching functional English, or you are teaching English comprehension, right? So, or you are teaching freshman English 1. So you need to define the objectives of the course, and you can find the course objectives on AGC website as well, right? So when you teach language particularly, so you need to define objectives of the course. Because why we need to define these objectives? Because once you know the objective and you have defined these objectives, so those objectives would be in front of you, and in the classroom testing, those objectives would stimulate you to stick to them, and of course to exercise them, you see, because you know the objective, you know where to reach, and accordingly you plan. If you are not clear about the objectives, so your class would be, and of course it could be a mess, because you don't know your destination. So objectives should be defined and also should be followed, in fact, once you have your activities. So defining the course objectives, if all the tests are written tests, the students will soon concentrate on what? Perfecting the skills of reading and writing. Clear? So if all the tests that you do, that of course only their writing and reading, so they will try to improve their reading and writing skills. If the teacher explains to the student that the course is intended to teach them how to perform the language with near native fluency, and then persist in giving tests composed of translations and what? declension tables, the students will what? Continually refer to traditional grammatical terms and English equivalents. Therefore, in a very real way, the classroom tests define the shortage course objectives of the teacher. Well, students, so this objectives of the course should be defined, right? And teachers, being teachers, you should in fact act out accordingly. Because if objectives are to help students in of course, right, if your objectives are to help students in their fluency of language, right, if you want students to be good at of course speaking skills, if you want to develop fluency of the students, and your tests are based on more reading and writing, so again that there is a gap between your objectives and the way you test your students, right? So in this way, whatever your objectives are, you need to make activities, make tests, you need to assess students accordingly. So again, once you have the objectives, these objectives are stimulate student progress, right? Stimulating student progress as much as possible. The time given over to classroom testing should provide a rewarding experience, right? The test should furnish an opportunity for the students to show how well they can handle specific elements of the target language. Gone are the days when the teacher designed a test to point out the students' ignorance or lack of applications. Right? So again, that of course, this is a very important point, that your test should stimulate student progress, right? And again, that of course, the test should be, if their tests are well designed, they are of course as per the objectives, as per the activities that we did in the class, then of course they would really stimulate student progress, and you can easily in fact judge them. You can, again, you can easily assess them. If your test is altogether different from your activities that you did in the class, or altogether different from the objective set, so things would be different. Evaluating class achievement, my dear students, through frequent testing, the teacher can determine which aspects of the program are, presenting difficulties for individual students and for the class as a whole. By analyzing the mistakes made on a given test, or more precisely on given items of that test, the teacher can determine where to concentrate extra class drill and how best to assist each student. Clear? Because this is what that once you in the classroom assessment you focus on, you come to know that which for example, if the teacher feels that students, they can speak, but they struggle in pronunciation, right? So here you can say that the teacher can in fact give more drills to the students so that they would improve their pronunciation. Or if they feels that students struggle in their syntax, right? So more drills can be given on the syntax of a sentence, right? Or if the teacher feels that, well, the students struggle in the vocabulary, in fact, so more exercises, more drills can be done for the improvement of the vocabulary. So evaluating class achievement, right? It is very important, and once you see the class, you see their of course improvement in one area, and then of course you see their in fact their good points and their gray areas. So in this way, my dear students, what happens is that you can evaluate of course class performance. So three things, I repeat again for you, that world defining objectives, right, should be clear, then stimulating the students' progress, and then evaluating the class achievement is important. Now, dear students, types of test. What are these types of tests? Before that, we talked about, first one is simple, the role of testing in the classroom. We talked about testing in the assessment, role of testing, then with 3 points, and then now types of test. There are 4 basic types of language test: aptitude test, progress test, achievement test, and proficiency test. Right? There are co-generated tests are there as far as language assessment is concerned. Aptitude, right? progress. Fine. Of course, aptitude of the student. Right? Does the student have this aptitude for this, for the skill? Right? And then, of course, the progress test, in fact. You see the progress of the students. Fine. And then achievement test, and of course, proficiency test. Now, what is aptitude test? This test is conceived as a fine prognostic measure that includes whether a student is likely to learn a second language readily. It is generally given before the student begins language study, or may be used to select students for a language course, or to place student in what sections appropriate to their ability. So sometimes you see that what happens is, generally, if you talk about the common practice, that you see when students apply for a particular language course, so administrators of that center, they put the students they have to put them in different grades, different sections. So how administrators determine the level of the students? So they simply give them some tests, right? So seeing that performance in those tests, or once those tests are marked, and then administrators set a criteria that, of course, somebody who gets 50% marks should be in, of course, in foundation. Somebody who gets 70%, 60% marks should be in certificate course. Somebody who gets 70% marks should be in the diploma course, for example, if there are three levels, right? So based on that assessment, that evaluation, that marking, right, you see what happens, that we grade our students, or we place our students. That can be called as a placement test, right? Because we have to place students in different programs. Some are easy programs, some are complex programs, and so only those tests determine where that student should be placed. So aptitude, right, is, of course, is conceived as what? Prognostic measure that includes whether a student is likely to learn second language or not, right? So this is a test, of course, we call it aptitude test. Does the student have aptitude for it or not? I mean, some students are there, of course, they are very quick learners of a language, and their test performance and their of course, the interview that they take, it shows that, of course, they have urge, they have aptitude for it, right? And some students, of course, they may have, of course, they come from different field, but again, their interest in the language can motivate the interviewer, right? So aptitude, of course, is a test generally that speaks volume for your, of course, for your likes or dislikes for a particular course. But in our case, of course, it's a language program. Progress test, yes, test measures how much the student has learned. It's simple. It shows the progress of the learner, right, in a specific course of instruction. That supposing he has attended a 6 months certificate course, so then you see his progress, that in 6 months what has he done, what has he achieved. The test that the classroom teacher prepares for administration at the end of a university or end of a semester are progress test, in fact. Their format reflects the various components of the curriculum. The handbook is, of course. So progress test, this progress test, in fact, of course, the test which is the taken generally after a specific period of time, and this test, in fact, of course, talks about the progress of the learner, that how much he has learned, right, and what is his performance so far after 30 days, after 50 days, after 60 days. So this test, in fact, we call it progress test, that is generally done after 2 months or 3 months or after a semester. Achievement test is the next test, that is, we're talking about the types of test, fine. So first we talk about, a while from now, we talk about progress test, right? Now the achievement test. Achievement test is similar to the progress test in that it measures how much the student has learned in the course of second language instruction. However, achievement tests are usually not built around on one set of teaching material, but are designed for use with students from a variety of different schools and programs. As I've just told you that the achievement test, of course, it is more or less, in fact, this test goes with the progress test. Now, what happens in this test, my dear students, that you see, once you, of course, you see the progress of the student, it is not based on the one set criterion, right? So, in this achievement test, in fact, what we do, that of course, but we keep in mind the other situations as well. We keep in mind the other important points. Fine, these are designed for the use with the students from a variety of different schools and programs. In fact, that we see that of course that maybe the language courses are offered in one center and language courses are offered in the other center as well. So how much they have achieved and how much we have achieved. So once there is a competition, in fact, among institutions, among various language centers, so then of course we see that how much language center A has achieved and how much language center B has achieved. This is what mean achievement tests are there. The next test we call it proficiency test, right? The proficiency test also measures what students have learned, but the aim of the proficiency test is to determine whether the language ability correspond to specific language requirements. The proficiency test in fact usually reports student language ability on a continuum that reflects a predetermined set of categories. So here is proficient. How proficient the learner is, right, in interviewing and giving instructions and receiving instructions and executing instructions. How proficient the learner is in giving directions. How proficient the learner is in fact, of course, working in day-to-day environment. How proficient the learner is in his workplace. How proficient the learner is in his home. So this is what means where proficiency is checked, right? A test that, of course, in fact, assesses proficiency of a learner, and sometimes your writing proficiency is assessed, and at times your oral proficiency is also in fact examined or assessed, right? So this is a test, the proficiency test. It in fact what examines the proficiency of the learner, right, students? So this is what mean the three tests we talked about, that is proficiency test, progress test, in fact achievement test, and aptitude test. These are in fact different types of tests. There are 4 types of tests are there. For your understanding, I repeat for you that aptitude test is one, progress test, achievement test, and proficiency test. You can call them AP, in fact. A for aptitude, P for progress, right? Again, A for achievement, and P for proficiency. So we call it AP and AP. In fact, aptitude, progress, achievement, and proficiency test. Now, testing items, very important point. What are the testing items, my dear students? When we design a test question, we should focus on the following important points. There are some points that we need to consider, that we need to know, right, when we design a test question. My dear students, these things are there that generally people ignore, right? Maybe they think that of course we need to teach language and there is no need of knowing such things. But definitely once you will be a professional teacher, you will be teaching English as a foreign language, so you must know these things, right? So you should know that which type of test is it. Is it a progress test? Is it an achievement test? Is it a proficiency test? Or is it an aptitude test? And you need to know the differences among these tests. So all are tests in fact, but there are some small differences among these different tests, right? If you know, then you can design it well. So testing items, right? Validity, reliability, discrimination, difficulty. It's a very important point, right? You need to think over it in fact, that what is validity? Is it valid or not? Right? So test validity, of course, if you talk about stats, right? So validity of your test is important. The test that you have used to verify to validate your data, is it valid or not? Right? So definitely the test that you design, the test that you make, is it really valid or not? And then again, its reliability. Is it reliable? Right? And how will it be reliable? Again, you have to see the output of that test. For example, you have designed a test to check the syntactic pattern of a student. In fact, of course, maybe you want to test the syntactic patterns of present simple tense. So whatever test you have designed, if you have given that test to the various subjects, and you feel that, well, this test was designed and it worked well, so now you can say that this test is reliable, right? Of course, you have used it in different contexts, and that test, gave you results. So you can say it's a reliable test. And again, discrimination. Fine. That of course, when you design test, you need to know that either it is, either it is discriminatory or not. Fine. And then of course, difficulty. These are of course we call them the testing items. You must understand these things that which validity, reliability, discrimination, or difficulty. Types of test items, in fact. So test items can be designed in various formats. A test whose items are designed in different formats tends to have more validity and reliability than a test that is designed in a single format, for example, multiple choice format. Clear? So again, that you see, talking about the types of test items, so those test items that can be designed on various formats, right? A test whose items are designed in different formats tends to have more validity and reliability than a test that is designed in a single format. For example, simply you just fill in the blanks. So only this is one format that you use, one item that you use, that students have to insert, of course, some prepositions. So this is one. However, if you, of course, design your test and your items are fill in the blanks, true false statements, right, complete the incomplete statement, right, or you give them multiple choice questions. So again, now here it is that more items are used. So it is that when you use more items, again this the more items for formula, in fact, can be more reliable. Why? Because if you just use one format, the fill in the blanks, and give 50 questions, right? So again, that of course, while marking, the teacher gets bored, and even students, if they are not good at that, so for example, you have given 50 questions of prepositions, and if that learner is not good at prepositions, so again it would be difficult for him to do that. So that cannot be reliable. These are the most frequently used test formats. So the most frequently used test formats, very important, the questions and answers, right? Now what is question answers, in fact? See, when you give some questions and you expect answers, right? Now again, these questions, of course, when you assess language, in fact, you are in fact a language teacher and you have taught that language. So one could be that you give questions and there are specific answers, right? So questions can be open-ended and question can be closed-ended, right? Open-ended questions, in fact, when you of course give those questions and then you expect answers from the students, right? So if you just ask for the yes no answer and then you see that do you need it? Do you really need yes no answers? Or you make some open-ended questions where students are given this space to express themselves, right? So this is a very common format, a very it's a traditional format, that there attempt five questions, right, and of course, right, and then you expect answers from the student. But particularly when you are teaching language, in fact, you are a language teacher, so then you have to think, can this in fact format be used, right? Though people say it is the easiest of all, that you simply write some questions. For example, you see you may talk about that, what are the sub skills of reading skill, right? Now here, of course, definitely if the student know about the sub skills of reading, they would write. Fine. So, or if you say that what are the sub skills of speaking skills, right? So here is a question, and there would be an answer. If students have attended your session and or they have read that handout, they would easily answer. But I mean, they might not know, in fact, what is exactly a sub skill. So this is a very common format which is being used. And talking about the language is one, but other courses as well, right? So when you in fact design a format, right, when you write a question to test the students, so you need to think over that which kind of format should be used. True or false questions. Again, that is one format that is generally used, of course, and people, put it in fact objective type questions where statements are given and you see the students mark true or false statements. If you remember in the last lecture, of course, I gave you 14 statements that what is assessment, in fact, and you people in fact tick true and false. You see yes, no, you people gave the comments. So a true false statements, again, it's a format that can be used, in fact, in, of course, what language. Of course it is one of the test format, but now we need to see that what are the pros and cons of this true and false statements. Here the one point that generally we feel that some statements may be true for the teachers, but maybe false for the students. So that's why when you use this true false statements, you need to be very clear. Some statements, in fact, may have different answers, right? For the teacher thinks that's false, but the student thinks that's right. So again, sometimes it happens that you see, you give some 5-6 statements, and then you say that to you this is the false statement, and of course the students, they bring an argument that now this can be a true statement, and they bring some references also. So here, in fact, there can be a problem that the student brings a reference because he has read somewhere that this statement is this way, right? So therefore, students, the true-false statements, true-false questions can be there, and if you want to use them, see how well they can be done. And then for the true-false statements, sometimes you give very, very simple statements to the students. So if you give simple statements, then maybe you want to simply pass them out. You want to, in fact, help them out, right? So if you want to give them true-false statements, then do specify the area where these statements can be taken, and then you need to think. You need to work really hard to select the true-false statements. Don't pick very simple statement that the student can easily, in fact, mark true or false, because this just needs 10 seconds. So at least make a statement for the true-false question that student would think over, right? And they would stop and think, and then they would mark the statement. Multiple choice question, these days, of course, is very easy, commonly used format that, well, there are statements and answers are provided, more than one, there may be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And why they are being used? Because they are easy to mark. Of course, through computer you can mark these tests. Easy for the examiners, of course, and maybe sometimes people say it's easy for the students, that they can easily mark the statement, right? So here, multiple choice questions, fine, can be used, right? But see that, of course, again, there could be a problem with true-false statements in MCQs, right? And of course, at time, the wording of MCQs, of course, that statement creates a problem. Many a times it has been seen that if you might have taken NTS test, of course, some statements when you read, you are unable to understand those statements, and of course, there are some problems in these statements as well. So therefore, my dear students, when you are planning to have multiple choice questions, then your circumference would be broader, right? MCQs cannot be taken from a small circumference, so broad circumstance can be. All right, gap filling or completion, of course, can be a format that is used, and among the test formats. So yes, that which kind of gaps should be left out. Prepositional gaps, of course, content word, linkers, whatever. So these things you should decide on which kind of gaps should be left out. If the prepositional gaps are there, content words gaps are there, right? So these things you have to work on. Matching questions, I generally of course match the statement. We say statement A with B, fine. It's possible you can give us statements of 10 statements on A and 10 on B, and of course you can ask the students to match column A with column B. Generally, of course, very old activity. In language teaching course, it is used, right? You can, for example, Mr. Ali, and of course, right, and then Ali's home address, of course, may be given in the column number 3. So you can, Ali's column can be matched with his home address, or Zishan's qualification is given, so you can do that. And before that, maybe you give a paragraph and you talk about Ali and Zishan, you talk about their qualification, you talk about their work history, and then you can make 2 columns. And of course, for the beginners, it's okay. Dictation, again, it's very important, right? That you can dictate important points to the students, because dictation, again, when you give dictation to the students, so there is an integration of skills, because you dictate, you read, right? You take pauses, right? And the students learn, find that where to take pause, and the students listen carefully so that they have to write. In fact, so you speak, being teacher. The students listen, of course there's a listening activity, and then finally they write, so there's writing activity. And sometimes if they are not clear about something, they ask for the clarification. So dictation again is a good source. And of course in your workplaces, my dear students, at times your bosses give you dictation. They dictate you a message and you write that message down, of course. And before giving dictation, you need to make things clear that of course way to put a pause, right? In fact, and while giving dictation, you see, you need to spell out important words, and particularly when there are para words, you need to dictate that. Transformations, in fact, again, is very important format, that you give declarative statement to the students and you ask them to convert it into imperative statement, or you give them positive statements and you expect from the student that they need to make a negative from it, right? So transformations, again, it's a very good test for format. If you give them a simple sentence or 2 simple sentences and ask them to transform into a compound sentence, right? Or you give them a compound sentence and you ask them to transform into 2 simple sentences. So transformations can be given from positive to negative, negative to interrogative, or sometimes to double interrogative. So transformations can be a test format that can be used, and it works, in fact. You see, because once students learn how to transform, so their language learning definitely is faster. Translation, of course, in the old method, grammar translation method, yes, people say that translation is a good source, because once students learn to translate language from one to of course, in another language, so they improve. In fact, the language is improved. Fine, and they try to, because translation, in fact, makes you think. Fine, you think more, and of course, when you think more, and then you definitely you learn more, in fact. Essay writing, again, of course, for the writing, definitely. Generally, in fact, in our curriculum, if you see that from class 5th onward, there is one question, a set question there, the essay writing, in fact, because teachers feel that the student should be good at writing. So essay has become a compulsory part. Even in our comparative examinations, their essay is given 200 marks. So essay writing is the first paper, because once you write an essay, you reflect that you have language, you reflect that you have knowledge, you reflect that you can organize things, all that. Interviews can be done, in fact. Vivas, of course, particularly there can be oral exams. Viva is conducted, of course, and my dear students, definitely this test format, in fact, helps those who are very good at of course, in the Viva, and essay writing helps those who are very good at writing skills. So again, it's a justice for all, right? That people who are good at speaking skills, they shine in Viva, and those who are good at writing skills, they do well in their written in writing examinations. These are in fact most commonly formats, of course, test format. Now, dear students, let's come to the conclusion. So we started with the discussion about assessment purpose. We believe that assessment is to find out what the students already know, right, and can do, rather than what they do not know and can't do, right? This is a very important point, right? So what the students already know and can do, rather than what they do not know and can't do, right? However, at the present time, assessment test in particular is often conducted to find out the students' weaknesses, which damages the students' motivation and confidence in language learning. This is a very important point. The tests are not there to demotivate a learner. Tests are not there to, in fact, to increase dropout ratio of the students, right? So tests, in fact, they need to motivate the students. The tests are there to give confidence to the language learning process, because once the tests are conducted, right, and if the tests are conducted well, so students should be motivated that yes, they should accept that this was the problem and now they need to work on it. So taking results of a test positively, making students realize this practice is also important, that the teachers should make them realize that the tests are there to help them out. Tests are not there to discourage them, in fact. And again, if you move on, the assessment can be done in many ways, right? We can do assessment in multi ways. In fact, testing is only one of them, right? Assessment, there are many ways of assessment. Testing is only one of them. So varying assessment methods according to assessment purpose and context helps to make assessment fair and more reliable. Again, you see, when you make assessment, in fact, as we discussed, there are many ways of assessment. So you have to see that where are you teaching, which context you are teaching, and who are your students, so you can vary your assessment accordingly. Well, students, so you need to vary, you need to adjust, you need to modify, you need to redo your, in fact, assessment as per the situation, in fact, and that would be better. Whatever methods or formats are used, assessment must always follow a set of principles which guarantee assessment, validity and reliability. This is very important, right? Generally, if you see, you can have a long discussion on it, that our assessment at times it is not valid, because we don't see we don't check its validity, right? And again, it should be reliable, and we must keep on working. Once you are a practicing teacher of the language, you will be teacher of the language, so you must keep on working, right, on the validity and the reliability of the test that you give to your students, in fact. Even on the formats of the test, in fact, see, because we follow the trodden track that people give objective questions, and we start giving objective questions without realizing that why objective questions are given. There was a culture of subjective questions, and of course everybody used to give subjective questions. So validity and reliability of assessment is a must, in fact. So when tests have to be used in assessment, great care must be taken when teachers design test formats and items. Which test format should be used, right? Which test format should be used? Question answers, in fact, MCQs, right? Or in fact, true-false statements, right? Designed in different formats tend to have more validity and reliability than test design in a single format. I told you earlier that variety, of course, variety kills monotony. Variety, in fact, of course, brings justice, right? If you use this one test format for all the students, so that may not be fairer with everybody, in fact, right? So variety in the test for formats and also items, right, brings, of course, makes your test more valid and reliable. Now it's a time to summarize this lecture number 24. So dear students, what did we do in this lecture? That we, in fact, in the last lecture we started talking of assessment, and of course we had a detailed discussion on what assessment is, right? And then of course in this lecture we assessment principles, that what are the principles of assessment. And my dear students, you remember we talk about more than 10 principles, that these, I mean, of course assessment is done to assess what? The essential skills of language learning, that whether the students are improving their listening skill or reading skills or writing skill or speaking skills. Fine. And also when we do assessment, of course our purpose is to see, in fact, of course, I mean, see that whether the assessment purpose is fulfilled or not, to see whether administrators are happy, whether their purposes are fulfilled, whether teacher purposes are fulfilled, in fact parents' purposes, and of course the students, right? So that's why, of course, mean that when you talk about the principles, we have to keep these principles in mind, and we also discussed that these are all the principles, and of course ideally what we do, that we try to keep all these principles, we try to incorporate all these principles, but you see reality can be different, in fact. So testing in assessment is very important, of course. You see, we talked about different types of tests, right? And then of course and then we talk about the most commonly, frequently used test formats, right? We talked about question answers, right? That of course questions are given, right? And the teacher of course writes some questions and expects answer from the students. Or another format can be MCQs questions. These days, of course, you must have taken lots of tests where MCQ questions are given, multiple choice questions are given, and you have to pick, right? And again, the drawback of this sort of pattern is, this sort of format is, that students are now, your lot that comes to you, the student that come to you, they are weak in their expression, they cannot write, because in MCQs the format, there is no, of course, there is no section for the writing of the students, right? Over there they simply have to pick the right option. Generally, in fact, of course, once we in fact assess the students, and if they come from this MCQs, the just format, the method, so they are very weak in writing, that they cannot even write a small application, right? But they in fact, generally students prepare from different available resources, they come for the exam, they take that exam and they qualify, right? So other test formats are also there, like you see, we talk about the question answer, we talk about true false statements, right? But the good thing is that, of course, if you bring a variety in the test, of course, test items, right? You can use true false statements, you can use, in fact, MCQ statements, you can use fill in the blanks, in fact you can use complete the given sentences, or you can think of many other test items, and of course considering the text format, right? Then we talk about different types of test, right? Aptitude test we talk about, right? We talk about the proficiency test, we talk about in fact progress test, right? We talk about achievement test, in fact they are important, and of course we need to know that which test in fact tests what. It's a progress test, what does it test? See, if it is achievement test, that why do we hold achievement test, and of course other tests as well. Frequently used test formats, we had a detailed discussion on that. So this is what, my dear students, in fact this whole lecture was about, that what is assessment, what is the purpose of assessment, right? Why do we assess our students, what are the methods of assessment, in fact, right? And then, in fact, of course, what are the principles of assessment, and we need to also understand what are the principles, and of course we need to see that how these principles can be incorporated. And then of course we talk about some testing, language testing in assessment, and then we saw in fact some different types of the test, and also we talk about frequently used test formats. So I mean, this is one that we try to encapsulate in these two lectures. Of course, once you read your handbook and you would consult different sources, you will definitely learn more. And mind you, this is a very important area, right? This area needs more research, in fact, that of course how well we can assess our students, right? Because if you are a good teacher, if you know how to teach well, you need to know how to assess students well. And again, that of course, well, validity and reliability of your assessment is important. And how would you find out that that assessment is reliable or valid? That you need to know the test, of course, and you can check its reliability also. You can in fact of course review literature also. But once you are a practicing teacher, and whatever test you design and whatever test item you put in that test, and use it, right, for the students and see the result, fine. And if you feel that well, it brings the result as per your expectation, you can say it's a reliable test. And again, test is different in your subjects. So once you use that test in different subjects, in different situations, and if you feel that it works, it means that test is a reliable test. So dear students, this is the time to say goodbye to you. See you in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz.